So again, my name is Dennis Carter. I'm Chief Program Officer at the Youth Development Institute at Rambo for Children. I will be one of your facilitators today, and I'm joined by my colleague.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Theo Phillips. I am the Senior Director of Community Partnerships at the Youth Development Institute at Rambo for Children. Still getting used to the title.
Excellent. So as we said, today we are going to really spend some time just kind of like talking about PBL from the perspective of really like a walking dialogue, because everybody here has done this before. So this is just a great opportunity for you to be able to ask your questions, get your thoughts out about what you've done or what you're gonna do using PBL this year. This is a real kind of like high level dive into what programming will look like. And we're gonna spend just the right amount of time to allow you to really feel comfortable in kind of getting your PBL projects going. All right.
So we're going to talk a little bit about our PBL model, refresh your memory about it. I know some folks are going to be doing their own thing, but what I would like to suggest is that you look at the materials that we do have there. One of the things that we do get the opportunity to do is work with a lot of CBOs during the summer, and we find out that you guys use subcontractors. And during some of our conversations, we've even heard from subcontractors like, wow, I wish I had known about this resource because it would have been able to help us enhance the program that we already had. So if you have a partner that you're bringing in, still definitely make sure you share this stuff with them, because the resources will only be able to give them more tools to work with your young people. So there's a positive youth development and why we're connecting this to PBL, why PBL is a work readiness strategy. We're going to go through those 7 project design elements associated with project-based learning, talk a little bit about asynchronous and synchronous stuff, really on the higher level, right? On the things that you should be thinking about and how to engage with your young people in different platforms and different ways to do that. And then some additional thoughts, some things that since you've done this, we don't want to, we can, and there's not going to be a full day of stuff. Like this is stuff, the golden nuggets for you to think about to kind of add to the mix before the summer gets started. And then it says Q&A at the end, but like Dennis and I have already said, we are encouraging that you ask questions along the process. All right. Any questions before we get started? See how I did that? I asked you a question already. All right, let's get started. Yep, this one doesn't have it. Yep. So we're going to talk about awareness. What is PBL? Not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. Understanding why PBL for the workforce and why we use this as a skill and what are the things we're intentionally trying to build in our young people. And then engagement, like how is this really different, right? How is what we're doing in the PBL model different than a service learning or community service or something like that, right? So we're going to spend some time on that as well today. So for those of you who do not know who we are the Youth Development Institute at Rambo for Children. If you've ever heard of the Beacon programs, around 25 plus years ago came in existence. YDI was created to support that initiative to make sure positive youth development practices and principles were really going to be at the center of the design of the program. But we've definitely expanded over the time that we've been there. And now we have contracts with most city agencies that provide some level of service for young people. And we do a lot of technical assistance, right? Our technical assistance generally shows up in the form of trainings just like this. And while we're doing it, we're also doing what we call little R research, really listening to what's happening in the field and how these things are playing out. And then we use that to disseminate information back into the field, right? So like, for example, we did a training last week and something happened. And as a result, we changed the poll, right? We changed the polling questions. Then yesterday, something happened again in one of the trainings. So then we have to change the polling question again today, right? So it's those types of things where just talking to folks and getting information for people is allowing and shifting how we deliver trainings from day to day, right? That's why your engagement is super important. And then sometimes when we hear stuff from y'all about what's not working, what really is working, we use that information to inform policy, right? When we go back and we meet with DYCD and we talk about what we're hearing in trainings, we talk about ways in which the program can be adjusted or changed to make sure that we're meeting the needs, not only of you guys, but also the young people that you're engaged with on a daily basis. And so that's who we are, and that's why we're here. If you don't know, now you know. So we're going to launch a quick poll so we understand what's going on in this space and who's here with us today. Dennis, launch away. So what we like to know is, how have you facilitated PBL in the past? Virtually, in person, not at all, right? How will your program operate this summer? Virtually, hybrid, in person? And if you don't know, it's all good if you don't know. Nobody's gonna be mad at you for not knowing. Okay. So a couple people not at all. All right. Some folks have done this virtually. Only one person has done this in person. Okay. But we have a lot of hybrid programs and a lot of in-person programs. All right. Okay.
I've done it in person too.
Right. Back in 2019.
And 18 and 17.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. So we've got everybody that has participated in the poll. So we're going to end that poll and share the results. So as you can see, a good chunk of you have done this stuff virtually. So you definitely understand the challenges associated with keeping young people engaged, right? And that's one of the things that we're really going to talk about and try to make sure that we bring to the forefront, because those are the things that really help make project-based learning become really meaningful and impactful, right? Because I don't know how many hours you plan on being on Zoom versus in person, but I know that whatever that balance is, you have to be as useful with that time and virtually as you are with young people in person, right? So good to see that we got a good blend of folks here, and we'll try to make sure we meet your needs. So what you'll always hear from us is a goal without a plan is just a wish, right? As you get ready to go into your summer program, one of the things that we're talking about beyond your project plan and some of those other things is those real critical things associated with positive youth development that really need to be embedded into your program design in a very intentional way, right? Otherwise, you're just hoping young people are going to experience these things while they're in your program.
And one thing that we want to emphasize, right? Like this notion of planning. A lot of times the thing that you're pushed to plan is like the theme, right? Like you're really pushed to figure out what are the young people gonna explore, and what you're not given enough time to really plan is what are the structures that are gonna allow the young people to participate in your program. Because remember, if you took this with us before, what we hear from young people is that a lot of times the activity that is great is when they're doing things by themselves, right? Like the way that you structure the asynchronous work, that's the language that we use, is great because they don't have to connect with anybody else. But when you try to bring them back together or try to get them to give you information, that hasn't been structured enough. So when we talk about planning and using a PYD framework that we'll dive into a little bit later, like that's the plan you need to have, because if not, you're just wishing that on the last day, you're going to have these amazing projects that people are going to want to see and that everybody is going to get through safely. Like you're just wishing for that because you haven't had enough mental space or time set aside to really plan for everybody to work together. And that's a big part of what we're going to talk about today. Does that make sense to everybody? are you guys, again, like wanting to be really clear, that's what has to happen.
So like I like to say now, if you ever see me on the street and you can't remember my name, just remember Mr. Intentionality, right? And we can't, you're going to hear this word over and over and over again from us, this notion of being intentional. And really where this came from was hearing folks talk about their programs being really organic and having this real organic feel. And what I was very clear with folks was, in order for you to achieve that organic feel, you had to do some very intentional things, right? So there was definitely training of staff. There was a really thought through schedule. There were all the things that were really necessary to make a program feel a certain way. And one of the things that we are constantly talking to folks about is the more intentional you are with how you design your program, the more likely you are to be able to do things with the feedback when young people give it to you, right? So if you know what you're doing and why you're doing it, when something doesn't work, or if young people say that didn't work, you can figure out how to course correct. But if you're just throwing spaghetti at the wall and grabbing it with sticks from week to week, when they say things aren't working, it's very difficult for you to figure out which part of what they're talking about isn't working, right? So we're going to talk about being really intentional. We're going to talk about some strategies and some ways for you to think about these things as you're going into your PBL season, right? So it all starts, and if you've ever been in the 101, we talk about this notion of norms versus rules, right? So let's start off right now. What is a rule? Like by definition, folks, what's a rule? Not like, don't give me like a rule like that you have to follow. What is the definition of a rule? And feel free to unmute yourself, folks. What's the definition of a rule?
So as opposed to something you're just required to follow. So
well, no, that's fine. That's a definition. That's a definition. So you're saying it's something you're required to follow.
or yeah, just I guess another definition could be a something that has been demonstrated to be valuable or useful or correct. Like as a rule, we do this or something as well.
Sort of, but we'll get to that in a second. Anybody else have a take on what a rule is? What is a rule? I don't know. Y'all have forgotten what rules are? Do you have rules in your program? What you got for me, Alexandra?
I mean, no cursing.
No, right.
No cursing. I like to say one mic, one speaks at a time. I don't like when people talk over each other because then we can't hear what everybody is thinking. So when I say one mic, I mean like I'm speaking right now. And same thing with vice versa with them. If they hear anybody interjecting or interrupting their thought, you would say one mic, meaning it's my turn to talk. You know what I mean? I think so. That's my main one that came to mind. If I think of another one, maybe I'll say it.
Okay, so here's what we're talking about here, right? We're talking about the difference between a norm and a rule, right? So when we talk about rules, right, rules in general are things we're made to follow, right? And no is generally in front of those words, right? Oftentimes a rule, we're not around when they're made. We have no input in them being made, and we have no say in whether they get changed usually. Because no cursing, I'd be like, fuck you, but I'm just, at some point cursing is gonna happen, right? Okay, gotcha. Dennis, you were gonna say something?
No, I just said like really being clear that rules tell us what not to do, right? Like they're really clear. So like the speed limit is a rule, or Alexandra just put up some rules, right? Like no cursing or don't talk over each other, but they don't necessarily say like the opposite and they leave a lot of room for interpretation, because if you told me not to do that, then there could be a host of other things that I do that you may not want me to do because we didn't talk about that. So one thing that we see in programs, right, are just the fun things that young people will do with the rules. It's fun to them. Sometimes it's funny to them because they don't really know or really think that rule should apply to them, because again, there's a disconnect, because who are you, or who was the entity that made that thing, that made that rule? And how does that, how do they really matter to them? Is a big part of this, because as we've said in the past, like, rules come from people who have perceived power, and sometimes the perception lives within the body that has made the rule, and certainly hasn't been always granted by those individuals that the rules are going to be enforced on. So Alexandra could say, well, nobody talk over anybody, but a young person could be like, well, who is she to say that we can't talk over each other? Like, you ain't nobody. Like, again, that's the way it plays itself out as a rule. Does that make sense?
So when we talk about community norms, right, the difference between norms and rules is the norms come from the young people, right? Or we like to call them, or you might call them, a community agreement, right? And really what we're talking about and what we're hoping to do in this space as we're creating these agreements, these norms, is to really teach young people the things and skills we actually want to see in the workspace, right? Just to remember and remind you and always come back to the fact that project-based learning is an approach designed to help develop young people's work readiness for their future employment, right? Always remember that, right? So when we're talking about things that happen in the spaces where we're doing work with our young people, we should be talking to them about the kind of behaviors we actually want to see, not the behaviors we don't want to see, right? It's a different world, because now young people understand that the behaviors that are associated with being in a workspace are different than those that are associated with being in my neighborhood or in my home, right? And that's something we really need to make sure that we're teaching young people how to have conversations at work, right? How to do things and collaborate with other folks, even if you don't like them, at work, right? These are things that show up in our norms. And I've had conversations and dialogues with folks, young folks, at programs, and they've been very clear that their norms helped them navigate conflict issues that came up in their groups, right? So really making sure that you're spending some time developing these norms with your groups, right? And revisiting them, right? Because one of the things that's going to happen is, as young people get more comfortable with each other and develop a deeper relationship and start working together differently, how they're going to agree to work together is going to change, right? So that's why it's really important that we're revisiting these things on a consistent basis so that they're reminded of what's going on in that space. So our virtual PBL model is very much grounded in our framework, where we're really talking about things that support young people as they solve these real world problems, right? And these things like collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, right? Those things that we will see, you'll hear us say, not only help a person keep a job, get a job, but keep a job, right? So we really want to make sure that even though we're doing things with them this summer in terms of PBL, that we're really trying to think and ask ourselves, what are we doing intentionally to make sure that we're developing young people's problem solving skills, right? Because a lot of times when things get difficult, who starts solving the problems for them? Y'all know, you can point to yourselves, it's okay. You'll start because there's this pressure of making sure there's a final project, right? So in terms of so when things arise, right, a lot of times the inkling is for us to step in. But one of the things we'll talk about and remind you all is that the final product is not necessarily the final come to of what's happened of like a final grand conclusion, right? The final product is literally a presentation of what the experience has been over the course of the summer and where they are and what information they have currently, right? They don't necessarily have to have solved the world problem, because if they did, they need to get a new job next summer, right? So it's very clear that this is all about making sure that we're engaging young people in something that is co-designed and co-constructed, right? And a lot of that starts right off the bat by creating those community agreements and talking about how as a group are we going to continue, as a group are we going to work together over the course of the summer. That's step one of getting these young people understanding that this is going to be something that's co-constructed, because you're also coming into a space, like Dennis said, where you've already identified a theme, right? But the theme will give them all these themes are very broad and give lots of space for interpretation and lots of ways, lots of areas for young people to really dive in to find something that is relevant to them, right? So when we talk about our PBL experience model, we start with this notion of connectedness, really making sure that we're putting relationships at the center of what we're doing, right? Can't harp on this enough. I was at a program last summer and we were on it was the last day, and the young people were about to present, and to kind of get them kind of loose because the facilitator could see that they were a little tight, he did a team building exercise, and the young people enjoyed it so much, and they were like, well, why haven't we been doing this all summer, right? So even understanding from young people and their experience, they really do engage around relationship building exercises. And we're not saying take a whole 45 minutes, right? There are things that can happen in 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll talk about those things a little bit later, that are really critical, that really do help on a daily basis develop relationships between young people and you, and between young people and themselves, right? One of the things that you'll see is this notion of being hybrid or virtual versus in person. There's a lot. You know, I got the chance to come out and see 2 presentations last year. One was a group that had been meeting in summer they've been meeting in person all summer. And they were in the same space, and you could see them talking to each other and course correcting and getting ready for their presentation. The group that had met virtually that was going to now be presenting in person, they were all sitting in the same room on their phones like they had never met each other. And I bet you they were probably texting each other in the room, right? So it's going to be really important that you're thinking about relationship building and how it's going to happen, because ultimately we're trying to prepare young people for the next step. And when we talk about preparation, we're talking about the fact that young people all strive for mastery. The problem is, while they're with us, sometimes they're not ready to master what we're talking about. So that's why it's really important that we develop relationships so that young people understand that we really do care whether they can problem solve, be critically think, you know, and develop some of these other skills that are employable for them moving forward. And we show that and demonstrate that by allowing our young people to authentically participate in our programs. Can't stress this enough. Workshops where young people just show up are not engaging unless you have a dynamic speaker, right? So it's really important that when we start talking about workshops and things happening in the program, how can we start thinking about roles and responsibilities young people can take on in those spaces, so that we're developing them so that by the end, when they're presenting in front of other folks, they've practiced some of that, right? They've done some co-facilitation with you or with one of the facilitators of a workshop, right? They've had some aspect of a workshop that they've had to put together, whether it's the PowerPoint presentation that they worked on with the facilitator, right? But these are things and ways in which we can get young people engaged in other things outside of our traditional PBL activities. Right?
I guess I just don't want to run past, you know, that part that Theo just shared about young people wanting to master something and not necessarily wanting to master the skill that you in the theme think they should be looking to master during that session or during, you know, the course of the summer. Does that make sense to people? Like as far as like, yeah, I'm structuring this PBL, but they may not want while we've been talking about this, to learn the things that I think they should learn. And like, just want to be really clear about that. And make it, and let you, like, please ask questions, because again, this is one of the areas where PBL could go left because of your plan. Any questions? So everybody is prepared for when your young people don't want to learn what you think they should be learning on Tuesday. Okay.
They got a backup plan. All right, cool. So, you know, and if you're looking at your plan now, just ask yourself these questions. Where are we developing relationships? It's hard to let go sometimes, I know. Asking ourselves, you know, where in my plan do I see relationship building? Where in my plan are we doing something that's also not associated with project-based learning, right? Because at the end of the day, what's going to keep them engaged is if they're talking about something beyond the project on a day-to-day basis, right? And we really need to make sure that we're being thoughtful about that in our planning process.
I was wondering if I could just interject real quick.
Yeah, of course.
So I was 100% virtual last year,
Oh boy.
and it was my first time jumping in, engaging with young people on this level. But I had been in job development for so long, and it took me a minute to kind of incorporate the packet with what I was used to doing as far as teaching young people work behaviors. So one of the things that we did to engage was every week they had to break off into groups online, of course, and create a project to talk about the proper work ethics, talking about sexual harassment, talking about, everybody had a different theme that they had to go into their groups, create a PowerPoint and come back and present to the group about the proper workplace etiquettes, dress attire, hair. And it really opened up some conversation about, well, why can't I wear ripped jeans? Or why can't I wear this, that, and the third? So that was really, really helpful for me when you talked about this end of the year project, once again, that was online, to be able to present in front of everybody, making everybody deal with everybody individually. So no one always dealt with the same group. I always just let the computer generate where they went. And they got to meet each other, then they got to interact. And then, so that was one of the ways that I was able to help them interact with each other and to be comfortable with presentation. Everybody had to play a role every week in what they were presenting to the group about workplace behavior. So that was away from the PBL norm of working on this workbook.
It's excellent, right? And then, like I said, the notion of them practicing that skill that they're going to have to do at the end is really critical. And understanding that they have different roles and responsibilities, and those shift and change from week to week. So that's an excellent way. And they're the ones leading the conversation, right? And they're also doing a level of research as well in order to put together those PowerPoint presentations. So hitting on a lot of great things there. Thanks, Sharita. So really going to talk about this notion of creating the right environment, right? And creating this right environment really does live in this PYD framework that DYCD has created. Now, has anybody ever seen this? Ever seen this? Oh, never seen this. I know you have, Judith. I know you have. So this is the DYCD Positive Youth Development Framework, and it really does live in the space that it is an intentional strategy that's designed to engage young people in multiple domains, right? Communities, schools, family, peer groups, and it recognizes and utilizes and takes into account that this is a strength-based approach, right? And that young people already have assets and know things, right? And we're really all about promoting these positive outcomes for our young people. But a lot of this lives with us being extremely intentional in the things that we're trying to see happening for our young people in our programs, right? So that this notion of promoting positive outcomes lives with us being very intentional about how we design our programs to support young people throughout this process, right? One of the things that I'd say is, you know, it's easy to look at the heading and or the title, but what we're really talking about is what's going on in these boxes, right? So as you're developing your plan, as you're looking back on your plan, ask yourself these kind of questions. You know, how does the program listen to young people? How do we understand young people from different points of view? How do we relate well to youth from different cultures and backgrounds? Ask yourself that question, right? Now, for those folks that are here right now, I'm going to ask you a question. How do you plan on making young people feel like they're a special part of the program, like they're a special part of a group, or or an important part of the program? What do you plan to do? What are some thoughts around that? I want to make my young people feel special and important. How do you plan to make your young people feel like a special group or feel important to your program?
And of course, you could drop it in the chat if you don't want to unmute, although we'd love to hear voices.
I think one thing that I've been putting forward in all of the orientations as we've talked to the younger youth and just explaining, like sort of trying to give them an idea of what project-based learning means, is just telling them that, like, when we say that we want like the projects that we're working on to be driven by you guys, one of the things I want to be really intentional about is actually meaning that and putting them forward. And when we're trying to think of like what it is that this project is going to be throughout the duration of the summer, yeah, that it is something that they're invested in and that they have buy-in and that they know that I'm supporting them and they're not supporting whatever my vision of it is.
Yeah, you know what, Stuart, like that, you just said the one thing that if I could get everybody just to pause for 1 second and look over here. This notion of getting responses from young people, like we're talking to you right now. And yes, some of you are on, you know, some of you will be in person, but how do you get your young people to even answer you? Because let's be honest, we're sitting here right now. This is everybody's job. And think about how hard it's been for us to get you to answer us. So I really hope that you are thinking about like, oh, wow, and drawing a direct connection, right? Like we know what we're talking about the same way you know what you're talking about. Getting people to answer you is gonna take time. We're not giving up. We're not gonna stop asking you questions. Don't give up. Don't stop asking your young people questions when they don't answer you. Because not answering is normal, especially when people are doing other things. And let's just be honest, your young people, many of them in your programs, especially when you're online, are going to be doing other things. But you got to keep making them feel like you're talking to them. So when Theo talked about making people feel special and making people feel important, like that's what we're talking about. Getting people to talk to you is not something that happens overnight, especially when they don't know you. We've had the pleasure of meeting quite a few of you. You've been in other trainings with us. But the voices don't always show up in the way that we want them to. Does that make sense to everybody? Like Okay.
So one of the reasons why we do show this framework, especially to you all, is because when DYCD comes out to do their site visits, and they come out to see your programs and they observe what's happening, these are the things that they want to see happening in your program, right? These are the things not directly and solely associated with project-based learning, right? One of the things I really want to make sure that we do focus in on, though, is this notion of appropriate structures, right? Because one of the things that we have found is that, especially dealing with young people from all across New York City, as we talked about yesterday and we've talked about in the past, some of our young people have identified learning disabilities and others don't. And they still come and participate into your programs. And as a result, we need to be thinking about all the different ways in which we're sharing information, either in person or virtually, right? So even if you come to, as you come to our trainings, we'll do things where we'll be speaking, but we'll also have some sort of visual aid to support what we're talking about, right? So even if you don't remember exactly what we said, hopefully that visual aid might help you. And then there's certain moments and times in which we actually do things with folks in trainings, which allow them to practice the actual skill that we're talking about, right? So making sure that we're incorporating as many different learning styles as possible, and really maybe even, if you can, surveying your young people to get an idea of what they like to do better, and being really creative with what we do with and how we bring things up, right? Whether we're showing movie clips, whether we're showing YouTube clips or whatever it is, whatever kind of video it is, but being really creative in how we're bringing up certain topics to young people, right? So like, especially when we're talking about work readiness, like, today we're going to talk about appropriate language in the office. I'd be like, I'm not coming today. That sounds really, really boring, right? But if you were to show a clip from, let's say, The Office, that might help you out in terms of like getting young people a little engaged, right? Because you showed a video clip of something outlandish and they're like, oh, that looks crazy. Let's talk about it now, right? And why that looks crazy, right? So those are the things we're talking about, like really thinking about different ways to engage young people with their different learning styles. So really critical are these other foundational pieces, right? Really making sure that young people feel physically and psychologically safe in the space, right? And that really does live in the creation of these norms, because these things are going to be what help drive conversations, especially as young people start having difficult conversations and sharing their point of views, and they're coming from different perspectives. Those things will really be important, always making sure facilitators know that those norms are developed and used to monitor and manage that behavior, right? And why we would say, and then to a further notion, right, the program engages youth in creating the respectful environment, right? That's diving more into these positive social norms, right? And like somebody mentioned earlier about the audience for your presentations, right? You all should be talking to your young people about the audience and who they want to hear about this from the very beginning, right? When they know that there's going to be an audience, there's a different level of preparation that happens. I'll even tell you, I was working with a group last summer. I went to go visit them. I was working with them for a couple of days. I gave the young people some feedback on some things they should do to prepare for their presentation. I was about to leave, and then one of the kids said, wait, are you going to be here for the presentation? And I was like, I don't know. What do you think? And they were like, you're going to be here. So the day of their presentations, they hadn't even thought about writing out what it was that they were going to talk about, right? They were just going to present on their presentation. They were going to show their clip and talk about what that clip was about and keep it moving, right? But instead, after having that dialogue with me and knowing that there was going to be an audience, those young people pulled out their cell phones and they had their scripts written on their cell phones, right? So it's just that intentionality of them understanding there's going to be an audience, right? And the more you put into this, the more you're going to get out of it. And the more whoever you're trying to raise this critical issue around will get something out of it, right? Because the worst thing to do is to put a lot of work into something and not have anybody to show it to or showcase it to. Dennis, were you gonna say something?
Yeah, and certainly the earlier, like one thing that, we cover this when we do our project plan kind of process, but the earlier you start talking to your young people about the final presentation and who's gonna be there and who's gonna invite them, the better, right? Because again, if you think about this notion of integration, right, of school, community, and family, like when you're talking to your young people about like, look, you're doing a project, we want other people to see it, right? Like we want you to know that you're supported. We want you to know that people want to hear what you think, and it allows those young people to then say, well, who do you think should be invited? And it allows you to talk about, well, who would you want to hear? And it's not a one-time conversation. This is one of those things that final project that you should almost be talking about every week. Who's coming? What are we gonna do? How are we gonna connect this to the larger community? So again, you're really encouraging them to have a reason to do the work. And then it really allows you to work with them and other members of your organization or other partners that maybe you've worked with in the past and get them to come. And as you begin to practice and structure, like sending out RSVPs, right? Like you'll start to make things happen that make the young person say, okay, I gotta get on my game because people are coming. Will it make all of them do it? No, we're not saying that, right? Because there's nothing you could do that's going to make everybody do something. But the more intentional you are foundationally, and that's why we talk about these 4 core areas as foundational, the more likely you are to have the type of outcome that you want. And we would say that almost everything that you're going to do from a week-to-week basis would be directly connected to these 4 core areas. If every week you're doing things that clearly speak to the physical and psychological safety of your young people, you're gonna have a good summer. If every week you're constantly thinking about how you're gonna engage your young people in respectful conversations about how they are thinking about other people, other cultures, you'll have a good summer. If all summer you're thinking about how are you going to listen to your young people? How are you going to see things from their point of view? Again, you'll have a good summer. And then finally, recognizing that they are connected to other people and other things and using that to kind of get you to that end you're looking for, you'll have a good summer. Now, we dropping the gems here, right? Based on the things that we've heard. I know it's a lot going on, but that's the beauty of this recording. So you'll be able to go back and listen to this like, like what are things that we could do? What should we be doing? So please ask questions when we start talking about this.
This is a good pause moment. Any questions so far about what we've been talking about? I know Medgar Evers has they have a small auditorium set up where they're watching it on a large projector. So love to hear if anybody in that room has any questions.
PBL with us. Again, if you've ever done a PBL with us, we encourage the use of timers. It really does allow you to share information with your young people. At times, it helps your young people guard the technology. Because again, a lot of times they're in spaces where there are other people who are around. And truth be told, even if you're in person, right? Like the more visuals that you can get, the more connected you can keep people to activities. So again, we super encourage you to use those types of tools that really help people stay on task and stay connected to things that are happening.
And that connected to people, right? One of the things that we, especially if you're doing stuff virtually, that you should do your best to do is avoid young people logging off and then having to log back on, right? If you're going to give them something asynchronous to do for half an hour, whether it's a reflection or an activity or, you know, a self-write, whatever it might be, put up the timer for 30 minutes and let them understand the expectations that they stay there. So it's almost like they're still in the classroom, but not being in the classroom. And all they have to know is that I'm not going to leave this space. Because if a young person logs off and has to log back on in 30 minutes, another one of their siblings could get a hold of the device, a parent could get a hold of the device, or they could just find something more fun to do, you know, just be like, oh, I don't want to go back to PBL. And that's just what they might choose to do, right? So we try to make sure that we're giving you as many tricks to keep young people engaged. So as we go through this process, right, really start thinking about your program design right now and asking yourself, you know, like, what are young people doing? What are facilitators doing? The more you can start thinking about what roles young people are going to take on in your program, the easier it'll be to integrate them into that space once they come into your program. If you're going to try and start figuring it out as you go, that'll be difficult. And there are some folks that are much better at being like, hey, Jackie, hey, Jim, you know, come join this and do this. And others need that prompting because this is the first time they've done this, right? So the more are you agreeing with me, Alexandra? So talk to me about it.
Yeah, I would say that in my honest opinion, because I would say I'm an extrovert for the most part, I'm naturally like, hey, let's do X, Y, and Z. My energy usually feeds pretty well with the kids for the most part. And so I would say that I usually get a pretty generous amount of kids that interact a lot. For those of the kids that don't necessarily interact a lot with the programming, whatever the case may be, you know, it's still an encouraging thing. I still get them to respond. It may not be on the great masses like everybody else, but they still participate though. And that's what matters. It's the effort that counts, you know? And I don't know, like you said something prior, or one of you guys at least, saying how, you know, even we have to like kind of encourage them and kind of get them to, you know, come out their shells in a way. And I don't know, I feel like depending on your personality, most kids go with the vibe. I think that's the word they like to use nowadays. And they like to go with who they are connected with. And majority of the time, for myself at least, because I can only speak for me, I can say that I usually do pretty well because of my personality, at least. I'm very theatrical in certain situations, depending on what we're talking about.
I can't imagine. I
You know.
can't imagine.
So
I
yeah,
knew
that's
you
my
needed
little
to
2
say
cents.
something because you started putting your hand all on your chest and you started doing, I was like, oh, she's got
Yes,
something. She's clearly got something to say, right?
definitely.
But the thing and what we want to really guard everybody against, right, is especially if you're not the only person facilitating and other folks are facilitating, right? This stuff is even more critical because if they don't have that bubbly personality that Alexandra has and that the understanding how to bring it to the table, right, they're going to struggle. They're going to have a difficult time. So instead of them trying to figure it out, that's why we've got to be so intentional in our plans around roles and responsibilities, around relationship building, right? Around making sure this PBL experience is fun for these young people, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, some of the other things you can do to kind of support that, right? One of the ways we like to think about this and get folks to start thinking about this is from a program perspective, right? One of the things we see a lot of is people offering activities, right? Activities being offered are different than a program that young people participate in, right? Activities are different. Activities being offered are different than a program that young people participate in. Any questions about that? Let's say it a third time, Dennis. Activities that are offered are different than a young person participating in a program, okay? I say this, what's your first activity in everybody's program? First activity in everybody's program, no matter what. What's your first activity? Uh-oh.
You're referring to an icebreaker?
not an icebreaker, before the icebreaker,
We're
First
referring to the-
activity. There we go, Judith. Welcome and good morning. Arrival, right? The very first activity that happens in your program every day is arrival. Young people coming to your program, right? So what I'd like to
Hold on,
before I
Theon,
say-
again, because just want to make sure, and I think I want to say the name right, but Elion, like being really clear that even before you get to a mood cast, the first thing that happens at every single program is arrival. And we want to make sure that that lands solidly before we move forward. Can I get a thumbs up with everybody if you understand what we mean by the first thing that happens at your program is arrival?
We got you, Alex. She's gonna leave it up. Right. Didn't get thumbs up from everybody. There's Judith. So when we talk about this, right, and we hear people say all the time, I want to see young people being excited to come to my program. I want to see young people wanting to come to my program, right? That means you've got to do something during arrival that's exciting for young people. Specifically, if you're in a school building and their first engagement that morning is with school safety, right? That will impact how that young person moves through your program, at least for the first half hour, right? So being clear that when we talk about big A, little a, we're not talking about just your activities. We're talking about the structure of your program, right? So arrival being your first activity. Then, I don't know, sometimes you guys do like a morning or after, depending on what your schedule is, a morning or an afternoon kind of get together before you do things, right? Think about what that's going to look like, what arrival looks like on Zoom, right? What are the things that need to be happening on Zoom in order to make young people want to arrive to that space, right? So a lot of times for you guys, if you come on to us with us, you know we're playing music right off the jump, right? One of the things we do when we have our cohort with folks over the course of 10 weeks, we actually have a cohort playlist that becomes our playlist, right? And instead of you being the one that's in charge of playing the music, another young person is responsible for being on to play the music. That way they know I'm going to be made a co-host and I got to make sure I'm on time so I can go through the playlist with Miss Alexandra or Miss Sharita before we jump on with the larger group. And that's an expectation for me this week. Now I show up different. All right. You gonna say something, Dennis?
Now, because see, that's arrival, right? Like like when we visit programs, most of you have all of your young people go to one central place when they arrive, and then they go to groups or they go to other spaces, right? So could be they're all in the auditorium, could be they're all in the cafeteria, they're all if you're in a center, they're in like a rec space, and then your staff, because your staff 9 out of 10 times is arriving at the same time as the participants. So again, being really clear, arrival is the first thing that happens, and arrival sets the tone for the day.
And that's even in the virtual setting.
Correct.
Right? Young people's logging on is the same thing as arriving to your program, right? So just thinking about that in the same way, even if you're doing a hybrid model, some of those things that you do in person, you should also emulate virtually if you can, right? So that regardless of whether that young person is in person or virtual, their experience around that, what you intended for them to happen or receive during arrival still plays out. So when we talk big A, little a, really going back and looking at that PYD framework and asking yourself, you know, during arrival, how are we making young people feel special? How are we making them feel like an important part of the group? Things like that, right? Excuse me. And as we said, Elion dropped in the chat this notion of mood forecasts, and we'll get to that in a second, because that in itself is a separate activity that we want to really spend some time talking about, because checking in versus checking up are two different things. So PBL is a work readiness strategy, right? Really talking about the Buck Institute for Education defines project-based learning as a teaching method in which learners gain knowledge and skills by working for an extended period of time to investigate and respond to an authentic, engaging, and complex question, problem, or challenge. Through PBL, participants develop cross-sector competencies that include active listening, critical thinking and problem solving, collaboration and communication, and self-awareness and self-management. Right. So this is the real connection between PBL and work readiness. These are the skills that when you're in your office or when you're on a Zoom with somebody and you don't see them demonstrating any of these skills or a lack of awareness in one of these skills, you're like, wow, how'd you get to be this far at work, right? So these are the things we really want to make sure. And one of the things that's been beautiful, Stuart, I'll tell you, I came out to your site last summer, and one of the things the young people said very clearly was that they felt more prepared going into the upcoming school year than their peers based off of the things that they had to do through the project-based learning process, right? This notion of collaboration and communication was something that, especially for those younger people, for those 14-year-olds who had been in like elementary school during COVID and then came out of COVID and like found themselves in high school, those young people really needed to figure out how to work together and communicate with each other, right? And one of the things that we know on a daily basis at school is that's not something, a lot of the skills you see here are not things that young people are taught to do. And in a lot of instances are discouraged from doing, right? So we need to make sure that through this work readiness process of PBL, that we're making sure that they're not only understanding that they're not only learning these things, but they're aware and understand that they're learning, that they're learning these things. Does this make sense to folks?
And we want to drive home, right, that there are tons of things that happen in youth voice and choice that you want to leave space for. But to be honest, if you don't look at these 4 areas, youth voice and choice will never happen. If you don't teach them how to actively listen to each other, if you don't give them opportunities to develop critical thinking and problem solving skills, then they can't make decisions. Again, collaboration, communication, self-awareness, self-management, you can't get voice and choice without young people understanding this. So your program should be structured to make sure that, as I said earlier, every week, these are the things that you're really looking to make sure without any question you're going to do. That saves the space for your young people to be able to talk and do all of the other things that you really want them to do, as far as like building out the program, building out PBL, and really making that authentic.
And a lot of these things can be fun, right? When you think about the things and the games that you can play that get young people to critically think and or problem solve or collaborate and communicate, that's how you develop that skill. Not, hey guys, we're going to talk about critical thinking and problem solving. Like what? Like, okay, bet I'm going to zone out on you like a goldfish, right? So it's one of those things that we have to be really clear, like this is where the fun can happen. There's a lot of space for fun to happen when we get young people practicing these skills in our programs.
Like a game like the Big Wind Blows in the auditorium that has all of your young people sitting and moving in chairs and doing all kind of other things, but they've got to listen actively to the things that are being said to them. is a way for them to practice that, right? Playing a fun game of telephone is a great way for them to be able to understand how to collaborate and communicate if information was sent from one end that really explains the task. So again, there are tons of fun things that you could do that take 3 minutes, 5 minutes, that teach this as a skill, as long as your intention.
And one of the things that we have for you in the resource is a book of icebreakers and things and energizers and things like that that you can do with young people, specifically around helping them to develop these skills in a fun way. So when we talk about the skills that we want young people, the attitudes and skills we really want young people to have are the skills that not only help them get that job, but keep a job. So when we look at these things, right, and we always talk about our young people wanting to be motivated and self-aware, but motivated means we're setting goals with these young people and that they have high standards, right? A big part of project-based learning and this whole work readiness approach for SYEP is also around career path exploration, right? So really making sure that if we want to keep young people motivated, we've got to help them set goals. Right? Goals are what keep young people motivated, what keep people motivated in general. And this notion of persistence lives in some of the things and some of the skills that we can show young people, specifically when we do things like our check-ins around mood forecasts and things like that, you know, one of the things young people always think about is like, oh, you show up every day, you're a superstar, nothing's going on in your life, right? But young people don't understand that skill of persistence and knowing how to show up on things that have been following through on promises, right? And showing up and being focused despite difficult things, that's a skill that is learned, right? That is a skill that's learned. Just showing up and being a jerk when you get there, that's not persistence. Persistence is being able to show up and still be focused, right? So those are the things we want to make sure we're teaching young people, this notion of active listening, effective communication, this ability to persuade, right? Because if they're getting into something that's really critical and important to their lives, they're going to need to persuade others that this is important and critical to their lives as well, right? So that's also going to be a skill that really gets developed during project-based learning, and then having this notion of shared purpose, right? One of the things that's difficult, especially if young people don't know each other off the bat, and that's why relationship building is so important, because that helps to develop this sense of purpose, of shared purpose. So I'm not just a young person that participates in PBL at RDRC, right? I'm a part of this cohort of young people, right, that participate in this program, and this is our group and this is what we do, right? Whether it's giving people group names or whatever you do, but like cohort 1, cohort 2, cohort 3, that's kind of boring, right? Give those young people those opportunities to create that shared sense of belonging by creating names, and they'll have their own identities, right? Each group's going to have their own identities. And that's one of the things you're going to see, especially if you're facilitating multiple groups. There are going to be some groups that are on Zoom and love being on Zoom. And then there's going to be other groups of young people that when they're on that Zoom piece, they're going to be no cameras on, nobody's answering questions. Okay. So just being clear that those are going to be some of the ways and things that the things get set up. So there are 3 stages to our curriculum. Really starts with this notion of engagement, which is really all about relationship building, getting young people oriented to the program, the process about what's going to be happening for them over the course of the 6 weeks, right? There's a level of orientation I'm sure you've done, right? Engagement is now you're in this space, you're in this group. This is who you're going to be working with over the course of the 6 weeks, right? Let's develop relationships and partnerships. As we do that, when we start to identify this problem or challenge, right, there'll be a level of investigation that starts to happen where young people are looking at the theme that you guys have set forth for them, and they're really kind of coming up with something that is really relevant and authentic to them. And then that last piece is them taking action. It's them starting to put together their project or something, whether it's a presentation, whether it's videos, whether it's podcasts, whatever it is that brings light to the significant problem or challenge that they've identified in over the course of the 6 weeks. So we have a curriculum that is available online on the website, and I will share that in the chat at some point before we get off for folks that have never seen it before. But it is a lot of self-guided activities, but it's also youth-facing, right? So a lot of the stuff out there, young people can see what you're doing. You can see what young people can see what you're supposed to be doing, and follow along with the modules as well. But module 1 really does talk about building community, both virtual and in person, and really helping young people to develop those relationships. Module 2, as I said, is about investigate. And through a blend of synchronous and self-guided learning, teams will research, analyze, and create a foundation for what's going to be their actual project. And last but not least, this notion of acting, right? And they're developing solutions and thinking about ways to implement them, but they're also receiving and reflecting on their experience, right? That's the important piece. When young people can say that, because of this experience, I now have these skills. Because of this experience, I now know this, and I'm walking away with this. Because of this experience, maybe I want to go in this career, right? Or go towards this career path or explore this a little deeper, right? So that's a big part of what the curriculum is set up to do and designed to do. And then really thinking about, when we go back to that notion of big A, little a, what are going to be the actual components, the actual structures that are part of your program that make these things come to life, right? If you really want to see something, you've got to have you have to have components, actual structures, not you being a nice person, right? It's this notion of an actual structure part, something you can say, something young people can say are actually in their program experience, right? So when you're reviewing your plan, go back, make sure you're seeing those relationship building activities, make sure you're seeing those critical thinking and problem solving activities, make sure you're seeing those collaboration and communication activities, so that ultimately, as the young people start working together and developing their project, they've already practiced some of those skills together while having fun, right? It's really hard to develop those skills when you're not having fun and you don't like people and you don't have a relationship with them, right? But being really can't use the word intentional enough. That's all I got to say. Can't use the word intentional enough. Dennis, can you take this one?
Sure. So here again, for those of you, everybody's been here, so you've seen this, like these 7 elements are what make a PBL program, right? Like, first and foremost, being really clear that what we're talking about is that the learning goals associated with the summer are all about what's the key knowledge, what's the understanding, or what are the success skills that you're looking to get your young people to receive out of doing your project. And then you know that there are these 7 steps, and the 7 steps don't happen in a sequence, right? As much as the 7 steps are constantly just connected in your program. First and foremost, your young people, you have a theme. Many of the organizations have a theme. Your young people have to identify either a challenging problem or a question that is associated with that theme. So you're going to have to be able to explain what the theme is so that the young people can figure out what do they want to know, or what is there a problem or an issue or something that is connected to that theme for them, not for you, for them. Second part that happens all summer long, your young people are doing this notion of sustained inquiry. They're doing research. They're constantly looking at and trying to understand both about the theme, but as well as their question or the challenge, right? They're researching it. The notion of authenticity, you have to figure out on a regular basis, how do you keep everything that is happening authentic so that you aren't driving where they're going from the perspective of what they want to see or do, but you are helping frame what they do based on this notion of it's your question and we need to kind of get more information. That's directly connected to student voice and choice. And remember, in order for you to get the voice and choice, there's some clear things that have to happen all the time. They got to be able to actively listen to each other. They got to be able to communicate and collaborate. And they certainly have to have a strong social and sense of general awareness about themselves and the world around them. Reflection, reflection, reflection. Reflection isn't something that happens at the end of the day. Reflection is something that is built in to everything that they're doing. And reflecting is a skill, right? And that reflecting and or that reflection is directly connected to critique and revision. Give them the skill that is connected to be able to do something. Be critical of it, right? Think about it. Really say, like, did this work? And then if it did work, keep going. But if it didn't, and this is where your intentionality is so important, right? Not only in your activity lesson plans, but in your overall plan, so that if changes need to happen from a week to week, sometimes day to day basis, you're able to know what they were doing when something happened. And that something happened isn't necessarily like, some people think that critique and revision is about things going wrong. Critique and revision might be, you might have planned on doing something, but they did something that day, it really worked. And you want to continue to do that. So you're going to take your plan and you're going to revise it because you thought that your young people were going to do this. And now they can do that. And that works because remember, it's their process. And that critique and revision is 100% connected to that public product. You're trying to get somewhere. So the more that you can get them to critique based on their reflection, based on their voice, based on the authenticity of the project, based on their inquiry that is connected to this challenge, that's the way you get to your public product. And that end of summer showcase of what they've done. Again, don't get caught up in they have to completed something. Sometimes the journey is literally what they're sharing and literally what they're going to talk to the rest of the community about, because that's how you want to continue to integrate the things that they're doing into personally, things that they're doing as a group into the other spaces where they live to really help them be able to connect the dots so that PBL really becomes a part of who they are. And certainly when we think about this notion of jobs and careers and that all of that discovery, it's all connected. And they can continue to do that either, on their own or in small groups. And for a lot of you that have those young people that are with you all the time, some of you have work, learn, grow programs. Some of you have other volunteer programs that you have. You can keep doing stuff like this to keep them engaged.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what Dennis just said. Even if you work with them all school year long and you do know some of them, you might not know all of them. And the importance of bringing young people that might not be a part of the group, quote unquote, into the group will be really important to make sure you're doing that. That's why we want to make sure that regardless of whether you know them or not, that you get the opportunity to continue to develop those relationships. Any questions about any of these project elements?
So these project elements, right, have to be turned into that thing that we call components, right? So you have to really think about and develop, use this word, activities that really allow for each one of the 7 elements to occur. And they're all connected to your engagement. And you want to make sure that in your plan, you're really thinking about the engagement strategy that is connected to this ongoing relationship building, right? Because one of the things that we hear and we do a lot of work with workforce programs, is that like, oh, in the beginning, they were doing all these activities that were relationship based, not only for the young people with each other, but the young people with the staff. And then when they moved into doing some of the skill work, they stopped working on the engagement. They stopped working on the relationship. They stopped working on the team building. So we want to make sure that you're conscious of the fact, and it's top of mind, that relationship team building has to happen throughout the course of the summer. It's not something that you do week 1 and then you pick it up again in week 5, or in some cases week 6 when the program is over. Now you want to fill dead space with engagement or team building. You got to do engagement and team building all summer long. We would say every day. Every time you're bringing them together, you want to think about how are you going to keep them connected and keeping them work together. As Theo said, sometimes there's this thought that they learn how to work with other people in school, but the reality is that 9 out of 10 times they're not. They're really sitting in a one-way space where a teacher or someone is telling them something and then they expect them to do something, but they don't necessarily collaborate. PBL is all about them working together. So you got to give that skill. Now, we're not condemning and saying that no schools do this. That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that you have to anticipate that some of your young people may come from spaces where they don't do that. So you have to have a plan about how they're going to get engaged, so that you have a plan about how they're going to work together to the end of, you know, doing some exploration, doing some research, and then kind of being able to have something they can share with the rest of the community. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? All righty.
This group is actually less talkative than the group yesterday, which is wild. Right, Nancy?
Maybe we've done such a good job with everybody.
That's what I said.
I think it's that looming placement deadline. That's got us all drained.
Right. I was about to
Gotcha.
say it's either that or it's like folks are doing enrollment still. I know. So a day in the life of a young person, there are going to be some days that they'll be doing some asynchronous work, which is that work that's going to happen outside of the group. And a lot of that will be kind of that self-guided work. Some of that'll be hats and ladders stuff. Some of that'll be some of our stuff, really geared around career exploration. And there'll also be times when they meet as small groups by themselves outside of the group, to continue to do some level of research and or planning for the final project. And then there's this notion of synchronous, right? Synchronous facilitation, which is the stuff that's generally facilitated by you or one of your facilitators, which is what happens with the larger group in the same space at the same time. So we talk about these notion of a few things called touch points to really help drive home some of the things that are really associated with project-based learning and this positive youth development kind of approach, right? So we're talking about content-driven touch points. We're talking about emails, encouraging group chats, text reminders. You know, one of the things that I know is that young people don't really operate through email. We're not to say that we shouldn't be using email as a form to communicate with them, because we're also trying to teach them work readiness skills, but also being very clear that if we really do want to engage with them and in a meaningful way, which shows that we understand their perspective and their point of views, having things like group chats or text reminders or calendar invites are really helpful, right? Think about how often you get a calendar invite on your phone and you're like, oh, if I didn't know about, if I wasn't in front of my computer right now, or if I wasn't in my building right now, I wouldn't know or remember that I had to be at this meeting. Especially with the hybrid model, things can get very, very sticky with that. Like I said to the group yesterday, if they told me I had to go to the office 2 days and be home 3 days, I'd come to the office on the wrong day every day. So oh, I guess I got it. Oh, not my day. Oh, I'll turn around, I'll go home. Right. So just knowing that is how an adult would play the game, being clear that young people play the same game. Phone calls when you need to, and Google Classroom or an LMS, whatever your LMS, if you're using one, can be used to also get out information. Talk about touch points, individualized communication, really being clear that, you know, sometimes during a Zoom session or anything like that, right? The side chat has been used over here quite a few times, right? Asking questions to people individually. So that's a real important way, right? Especially like one of the things that Dennis likes to talk about and point out is, you know, if Stewart's usually has his camera on, and then today's session, Stewart doesn't have his camera on, I'm going to ask Stewart, hey, on the side, hey, Stewart, everything okay? Just wondering why you don't have your camera on. Oh, yeah. You know, I'm just, you know, on my phone today, not in front of my computer. Or, you know, I got a lot going on in the house. I didn't want it to be a distraction, right? Because that's one of the things that came up yesterday that we had a really good dialogue around, is the notion of this virtual stuff. Like, you know, you're going to be in these kids' homes, and these kids don't necessarily control how their homes operate and move and how many people are in them. So those are the things to also consider and keep in mind. Game time, like I said, like we've said, making sure you're incorporating times for young people to have fun while developing the skills that we want them to develop and to be able to demonstrate during the PBL process. Virtual and in-person meals. We really do push this. It was a great conversation yesterday around this dialogue and notion around lunch, right? Like, how are you going to do lunch? Are all the kids going to be able to just go out and go do whatever they want to do? Are you in a school where the kids get the lunch in the school? What's the situation, right? Because I know that there was one location I was going to one summer. They were supposed to have lunch at a specific time, but the school never had lunch ready at that time. So there were all sorts of things that kind of happened around that. So really thinking about lunch and how you can turn that into a meaningful time. And this is going to go back to Elian's point earlier around these notions of these mood check-ins, right? So for us, checking in is an activity in itself. It's not something that happens in passing, right? So if we ask folks, do you check in on your young people every day? And they go, yeah, this is not a check-in. Hey, how you doing? Hey, how's it going? Having a good day today, right? That's not a check-in, right? That is something that we have been designed to do. Just like we ask people their names without even listening to them half the time when we ask them their names, right? So a check-in is a very intentional time that happens daily, maybe even, you know, I would suggest daily, where young people are listening to each other, right? This is the important piece about a check-in, right? A check-in is not something that happens with you and one other young person. A check-in is talking to that individual, speaking to the entire group about how they're doing, right? That skill itself goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier around self-awareness, right? And things like that. Now, I know if I pick on Nancy, but Nancy told me she's having a cloudy day, I'm much more likely to go over to Nancy and be like, Nancy, I'm not going to pick on you today. What's causing those clouds, right? We're also practicing active listening and effective communication and things like that, where we're actually only going to take 10 to 15 minutes of lunchtime, where we're doing that activity on a day-to-day basis, but we're practicing that skill daily. We do this with adults virtually. By week 4, they log on. I don't have to ask anything about how they're doing. They're dropping it in the chat. They're letting me know they've had thunderstorms, but can see the sun coming at the end of the week, right? So it's those kind of things where if we're going to do a check-in, we're giving young people very specific language to use, because sometimes it's very difficult for them to find the emotions, especially young men. I don't feel emotions. I ain't got no emotion. What's an emotion, right? That we have to make sure we're giving them language, right? Whether it's one of our favorites where we talk about a weather forecast, right? Or we ask one of the other groups, I do a flavor wheel. So people are like, oh, I'm nutty, but a little spicy. Okay, let's talk about that, right? So those are the things where if we're going to do things with our young people, be very intentional in it, where we're designing very specific times where young people know that we are going to check in on them as individuals, not as participants in this PBL process. Does that make sense to
Well,
folks?
we want to make sure that you connect the dot back to workforce, right? Like, because some people are like, oh, but what that can do with work? So in workforce spaces, like checking in and being able to talk about why they're feeling the way they feel is the difference in between a young person coming to work or a young person calling out, right? Because we've worked in workforce spaces when we were in our office where they have the training week. They never really taught the participant how to check in about how they're doing. They never taught the person to talk about how things are happening in the group. So what we would find is there'd be a line because our literal desks were near the bathroom. There'd be young people who would just be in the bathroom because something wasn't working, right? Either for them personally or for them as a group. Or we'd hear, I don't know what happened to such and such. I haven't seen them in the last 2 weeks. And when we were working with that group and talking to them about checking in and being able to get the young person as a skill, communicating how I'm doing in a workspace is a skill. You being really clear about what they could communicate, what they should communicate is the way you set up the activity. Does that make sense to everybody? Like, because again, we want to be really clear about what we're talking about and how you connect the dot to project-based learning, but also to work readiness skills that your participants need. Again, the notion is that as 14 and 15-year-olds, they're learning things with you so that as 16 through 24-year-olds, if they're still in SYEP or now they're starting to work, you've actually given them real skills that help them keep a job. We know that there are a good number of people who just don't show up to work. We know that there are a good number of people who show up to work and they do things that are not what we want. So you're still being charged with using PBL as a work readiness strategy. That's where active listening and all of these other skills that you're looking to provide through PBL are critical. There's the 101. So this notion of individualized check-in, when you reach out to them, you're teaching them how to reach out to you. When you do meals and you do other things, you're teaching them how to socialize with colleagues. Again, there's so much that you're intentionally doing or you are doing that could be intentional strategies that help young people not only get a job, but keep a job. Does that make sense?
That's the first time I've made that connection of having lunch with colleagues. It's a good one, Dennis. It's a good one.
We live
So some tech considerations, really thinking about your portfolio steps and the digital artifacts, right? One of the things that's really important about this project-based learning process is that you're collecting artifacts from your young people to make sure you're demonstrating the process, right? And SYP also has other documents and things kind of built into it that you're supposed to collect from them over the course of the summer as well. Virtual conferencing, if you're going to be doing things with young people virtually, like some of the hybrid stuff, thinking about what that space is going to be. Zoom is very useful because a lot of people use it, but it's not the most engaging one available. Kumo Space, I'm going to put out there as one that's actually free. And you can set up a couple of different classrooms on Kumo Space. And it's actually a free moving around space where you can be. Yeah, Dennis, were you gonna say something?
No, I was just in the chat. There's something.
Got you. I'll get to that in a second, Judith. That's really important. Kumo Space, because it's really important to find a space that is interactive and engaging for young people besides these boxes. And then mechanisms for your touch points, like, are you going to use a WhatsApp or a GroupMe or a Slack or Classroom Dojo, Class Dojo, but some way for young people to stay in communication with each other outside of the time when they're together, right? This practice has come along the way because Dennis and I have also worked with other youth groups, youth councils, and one of our youth councils that actually hasn't met in like 3 years just came back to life this past weekend. People catching up like, hey, just so everybody knows, like, I'm in the Air Force now. It's like, what? Or like, I just graduated from college 2 years early. Here's me in my cap and gown. What? Right. So the understanding the power that can happen from creating these opportunities for young people to connect in ways when they're outside of the stuff that they're traditionally doing with us is critical to keeping people inspired and motivated, right? When that group was really active on days when they had regents, hey, y'all, I know the earth science regents is today. Good luck out there, 10th graders or whatever it might be. So those are the things to really think about to help support you over the course of the summer. Right, this notion of checking in and really getting feedback from young people is really important on how the process is going and what kind of technology you're going to use, right? If you're in person, what technology do you have access to, whether you're showing videos, whether you're showing, whether young people are on computers, right? Because they're going to have to be doing research. So making sure that you're kind of getting those things locked down. One of the things that I also like to tell people as a piece of equipment that most folks should have is some level of a portable speaker, right? So thinking about those things as well. So we asked, what's your advice / resources for using AI? So here's my thought on that. I haven't heard of anybody doing AI. When you said, let's back up. Judith, I'm sorry, because I know some of the way folks have been using AI is through document creations, right? So like, I know that, my partner, that's really what she does. She'll work with AI and then she'll tell it what she needs and it'll create a document for her. I don't know if you're talking about that or if you're talking about like real like AI, like head glasses, like Quest situations.
Well, we don't have no budget for that.
I didn't know what was happening over there with Sesame.
No, I'm just talking about the different I guess apps that are available now to generate content, to do research, to queue things up. Have you considered developing a resource list, and what are your considerations in terms of integrating it into the PBL experience, because the young people are going to do it anyway.
Yep. This is why we have these trainings, because they help inform and shift and change how things get done. And I'm glad, and it's something, honestly, Judith, that until right now hadn't been anything I had thought of, but I will do some research because I know some folks that are using AI right now to generate documents and things like that. And if anybody knows of any, feel free to drop them in the chat. Oh, go ahead, Stuart.
Well, I don't know of any like particular resources for it, but I know it's something that I've planned to build into what we're going to talk to the youth about, mainly in terms of like getting conversations going around navigating sort of the ethics of it, how to use it in your documents and how to use it appropriately. So the difference between like using it to help you create your resume or your cover letter versus like asking it to write your essay for class.
Do your homework.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, I mean, not trying to tell them that this is something you should avoid, because obviously it's where we're at now and you need to know how to use it. But again, engaging them in that conversation. And then I think I'd like to just be like, here's the tools we have. What are ways that you guys can think of using them that are that can build on whatever project we're working on? Because as with any like new technology, I think the young people are going to find those really exciting and innovative ways to use it too. So like giving them a little freedom in some of those things to suggest how to use it as well.
Excellent. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thanks, Stuart. Yeah. Yep. We got some more stuff to think about, Dennis. But that's okay. Yeah.
I definitely think, thank you both, Judith and Stuart, for sort of like bringing that forward, because one thing we want to share with everybody, we just kind of talk about it quickly here, is that once a week, every Wednesday, during the summer, we're going to kind of come back together to talk about like what's going on. And maybe that's one of the things that we can just kind of push out, like, and just encourage people, throughout the course of the summer, if there are, great things that you're doing that we can share back to the field. We record those as well. And then every week we just throw them up, so that people are able to just kind of watch them post. So that could be something.
Yeah, or we could just have week 2 that could be one of our content areas where we talk about AI.
Yep.
Cool. See how that happened? You all just shifted and changed how we do our work, just like that. Caught on camera. All right. So like we mentioned, there are going to be some digital artifacts for you to collect. There's Google Classroom, there's Digication, Googlio, Book Creator. One that we have found lots of fun is Flipgrid. Flipgrid can be both, is a lot of filming, right? Where one of the things, you can prompt them with a question and have them on their phones do their recordings and submit that back to you. And now they have a recording of their answer or their reflection on the process. And one of the things that's really cool about that is you can generate QR codes based off of their responses, so that young person can get that QR code back and be able to look at their responses at a later date, right? So it's just one of those cool platforms that allow you to like do a lot of video stuff and engagement with young people in times and spaces when they might not all be on at the same time. But you want to still make sure you're checking in with them, right? And then there are the hard copies, especially for folks that are having technology issues and that struggle to have places to print stuff out. Dennis is big on having a couple of the hard copy workbooks that we have to offer, especially if you're doing stuff in person. Right now, you can actually have them run off copies and collect those things and scan them and put them in, make them digital or however you want to do it, so that you can create portfolios for your young people.
And one thing we want to encourage, because we heard about this at the end last year, DYCD gives you, and Theo alluded to it a little bit, documents that you have to create and collect on a regular basis. Make sure that you as facilitators or you as directors and leaders are communicating with your young people about all of the different, using the same language, we would suggest artifacts that you need to collect around their participation so that you get the things that you need. If you connect the dot to everything from the very beginning intentionally, then your young people will understand when you ask them to do things. Make sure as a program, you're really clear about all of the different things that you have to have in their portfolio. Make it all one. Don't separate it either in your mind or theirs, because at the end of the summer, you need things that are reflective of what happened. So if you need a resume, that's an artifact. If you need a survey, that's an art. What?
No, I was gonna say, I actually heard from young people where the program didn't fully think through the resume portion and took a day of their working on the project towards the end for them to have to do resumes. And the young people were like, that stupid resume day got in the way. And they were very clear about that resume day getting in the way of their process, right? So that, I just want to highlight that. That's all, Dennis.
Yeah. So super important, right? Just think about it all together. Don't think about it separately. Keep it all connected. Right.
So one of the tools that you'll be offered is the website. It's both youth and facilitator facing. It's got a lot of their self-guided kind of learning tools to help them be career ready, and to help support your summer project. The website includes portfolio steps, kind of like what's supposed to be happening for young people. There's a participant workbook that has worksheets and lots of things to expose young people to this process. Then there's the facilitator guide that really tells you kind of how you should be moving through this process from week to week. And then there's the digital library that also offers you all a bunch of resources. One that I want to point out in particular is the YPAR Hub, which stands for Youth Participatory Action Research. That particular website gives you tons of information to help talk to young people about how to do research, right? I can't explain to you enough. There's so many resources on that website that help you get young people to start using their voice to make choices, right? It's really, really good. So I definitely think you should all make sure you check that out. And then in terms of your project plans, depending on which one you've chosen, there are other documents there to support you along those lines as well, with websites and other alternative resources and places for trips that you can go as well. In terms of summer support, we've got one more PBL refresher coming up, and that's going to be next week. And then we have the PBL website walkthrough, which is going to be on June 29th. And then, as Dennis mentioned, we will be having our convenings over the course of the summer every Wednesday. I think it's going to be from 2 to 4. We tried doing things in the morning, but folks were all like, I'm dealing with young people in the morning, so I can't really do it in the morning. But office hours are just what they are. They're opportunities for you to come in. If you have a question that's very specific to your program, your time to come in and ask that. And if that's the only question you have about anything going on, you can get the answer and you can bounce. It's literally just one of those opportunities, a 2-hour block, where we will always have some level of content to go through, specifically around the things you should be thinking about collecting from your young people that week and around that time, and thinking about what you should be doing in the following upcoming week. So that's what we'll be doing during those office hours. Like we said, just trying to give you as many opportunities to get support through this process as possible. All right. Any questions?
People are like, oh, I gotta go.
Right. And the thing is, and we understand, and we talked about this yesterday in our group, sometimes you've received so much information, you just don't know what to ask questions about. But like I said, if yesterday, and we will always say, if anything comes up and you have questions, feel free to email us. We'll definitely get back to you to help support you. And then really take advantage of the office hours. And anytime you can come to a training, just sign up and you won't get kicked out if you've been with us before, because our understanding will be that you're there to continue to gain knowledge. And these things always show up differently and play out differently from time to time. So what you hear today, won't hear tomorrow.